He has perfectly blended our families together.
Is this technically?
It's a public meeting, but not a board meeting.
Well, it might.
Just a
for
study
real
session, so
improvements,
they
maybe
tend to be
it'll
more informal. We ask questions, it's kind of
Okay,
more,
good.
There you go.
I think we're ready.
Okay,
Mayor.
great. Well, welcome everyone to this study session on October 29, 2024. I call the meeting to order. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Perspeck.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Murphy.
Here.
Trustee Hardy.
Here.
Trustee Albrecht.
here,
Trustee Wing.
Here.
Trustee Ayers.
Here.
Trustee Kurtz.
Present. Excellent. This being a study session, we won't have any public comment or any reports at the end, so we can just jump right into a business development update. Our Economic Development Director, Walt Elish. Thank you, Walt.
Thank you, Mayor. Continue to eat. We want to make this hopefully a dialogue back and forth, so it's not so much a presentation, but a conversation, hopefully. Also with me are two industry experts in the region. Really, they are Rich Warner and Audrey Herbison with Upstate Colorado.
Welcome.
Rich is President and CEO, and Audrey is Senior Director of Economic Development.
Senior, I'm sorry, what?
Director of Economic
Okay,
Development.
great. Senior Director.
And Ryan Schaefer is founder and president of NAI Affinity. Their office is up in Fort Collins. They also have listings here in Berthoud. So I think you're going to get a lot of good information tonight. So what I want to do, well, let me get out of here. Give you a brief overview of what I do and how I interface with Rich and Audrey and Larimer County EDC, as well as Ryan and his staff and other commercial brokers throughout the region. So just some demographic highlights initially. We're about 13,233 people, latest 2023 census. We've been growing since 2015. 105% growth from 2010 to 2020. But for those of you who've been around, Will and others, you remember what it was between 2000 and 2010. It's complete opposite between those 2 decades, which starting in 2010 and then continuing today, this growth has spurred all the development you're seeing in town, as well as the new rec center, the trails that you see throughout town, the bike park, the planned arboretum that you are working on, and the new town park. All that, I like to think, is a result, of all the development that's taken place since about 2015. The other data, stats, median household income, median home values, increase, that's all typical of this part of the state, Northern Colorado, as well as education and college degrees. So what do I do on a day-to-day basis or monthly basis, annual basis? Focus my efforts in 4 areas: business retention, business attraction, business development, and communication. Just some examples. For business retention, those of us who work in Colorado, or Northern Colorado, we do that within our own communities, like I do, but we also partner with READY, Regional Economic Development Initiative, the Upstate Colorado needs at this point, as well as the Larimer Economic and Workforce Development Center. Larimer Economic and Workforce Development Center primarily focuses Larimer County, Rich and his staff focus primarily in Weld County, but they also support the efforts here in Laramie County. So it's a great partnership. So the business surveys that we do, those of you who attended our breakfast this past year and previous years, we hand out those little surveys that we ask for input from the business community. We do that throughout the course of the year too. All that information is tabulated for Northern Colorado and not just Berthoud. We meet with businesses on a regular basis, on-site visits, whether it's manufacturing and retail. I stay in touch with most of our businesses via email communication. I do that on a regular basis. It varies from almost industry or to business. If I see something that I think would be of value to a particular business in our community, I'll forward that information on to them. Most recent was Agile RF Information Systems, as well as Ursa Major, and others, whether it's Flow Systems or any other business in the community. And then the business breakfast meetings we have, we've hosted those over the course of the years. We've had small groups of businesses. And this is in addition to the annual business breakfast that we have over at the TPC Clubhouse. These are all in addition to that. Business attraction. I primarily work through the commercial brokers in Northern Colorado and in Colorado. Keep them informed of what's available here in Berthoud in terms of sites and buildings. I do a lot of that through our website. But I also work with, once again, Upstate Colorado. Upstate really is the regional, they are the Regional Economic Development Organization. They do all the outside marketing for Northern Colorado. So we'll often partner with Rich and his staff when they go on marketing trips, prospecting trips. We either support their efforts in those activities, and Rich is going to talk more about that in a few minutes, or we'll go with them if it's appropriate for us to go with them, and their staff. We also stay in touch with Metro Denver EDC. You know, JJ Ament was our keynote speaker this past year at our business breakfast. Colorado Office of Economic Development, all of us stay in touch with them because we all get a lot of inquiries through their offices as well. Site location consultants, national site location consultants, we stay in touch with, keep them abreast of the available sites and available buildings in Berthoud. And go to conferences and meetings, and for retail, we go to annually ICSC. That's where we meet with a number of retail companies. For example, we have, years ago, we were meeting with companies like Starbucks and McDonald's, Taco Bell, and others like that, other fast food, casual restaurants, or just restaurants. And we continue to do that on an annual basis, but in between the meetings, I stay in touch with them via emails. And one of the ways I stay in touch with them, is that I'll share with you later too, is when there's a new development in town, a new housing development that's been approved, or a new company moves in, I'll often email that information out to those businesses and say, you know, this is the latest new development that's occurred in Berthoud. I thought you might be of interest to you and your business. So what you all do at your meetings, whether you approve a development, I follow that, and if I think it's of value to businesses that I'm working with, I'll email them that information shortly after your meeting. Business development, I work with Ann and I work pretty closely together. You know, Ann Johnson, our community development director, and her staff on projects that she's working on. We stay in touch often. Inquiries will come in through Ann's office, or they'll come in through my office. We'll share that information, and we work very closely together on that. We also, you know, Old Town Hall is still there. We're still leasing space at the Old Town Hall site. I oversee that. Right now, we have 4 tenants in there. I'm not actively marketing that for new tenants because we're anticipating, hopefully in the very near future, we'll find a developer to really take that on and redevelop that site. Although if you know somebody that needs an office, have them give me a call. the website, and I'll show you that. And I use our website quite a bit. All the sites and buildings and the demographic information is kept up to date on our website. So how often, when I'm talking to a broker or a site consultant or a business, if I think it's appropriate, as we're maybe doing a Zoom meeting or on the phone, I'll have them go to our website. And we'll pull up their information, but other demographic information that's current. And I can walk them through that while we're talking together on the website, or on the phone or website. Downtown activity, I'm engaged in that quite a bit right now. I just had another DDA meeting last night over at the rec center. And hopefully, I think we're gonna move that forward, at least to put it on the ballot in anticipation of the businesses within the district boundary voting yes or no, whether they wanna create a DDA or not. The other thing that's coming up, we've done this now for the 4th year in a row, Shop Local program. We promote that very heavily during the holidays. And we also do that during Small Business Appreciation Week in May. And so once again, we'll be going out and buying. One of the ways we promote and support our businesses is not going out and ask them for donations. We go out and actually purchase $75 gift certificates from each of the businesses that have a storefront on primarily Mountain Avenue. And this year we'll probably have around 44, 45, once again, gift certificates to hand out. And then we also purchase, as part of this Shop Local program, encourage people to come downtown and shop, we go out and fill a gift basket. Huge gift basket with about $500 worth of birthday products from different retail establishments along Main Street. We go out and purchase those as well. And at the end, that's the grand prize drawing. But that's just one way to support our Main Street businesses. There's other activities that the Downtown Collaborative has their own activities. And we try to work with in tandem with them as they go out and promote Main Street Berthoud for economic development activity. And then communication. Let me just see if I can pull up this. One of the things, if you recall, a few meetings ago, Ben Price and I were here. We talked about the Telly Award that we received for the video that was produced. Well, from this year's video, which we think was really good, we produced a number of 30-second slots from that 6-minute video, I think it was. And I'm using those 30-second segments to show businesses, if I think it's a privilege, I'm talking to businesses on the phone or promote Berthoud, why other businesses are here. We're gonna just play this one. This is Sherpa Equipment.
Seeing Berthoud's investment in themselves is really refreshing because we're spending a lot of time investing in growing our business here and knowing that the town is going to grow their infrastructure alongside us trying to grow ours. It's nice to know that they're committed to it just as much as we are.
So from that 6 or 7 minute video that we produced this year, we have 4 of these 30-second segments that we use to promote Berthoud to primary manufacturers.
Where's that? Is this Main Street?
Looks like Minecraft, Main Street.
And then some of the photos you all can see. I guess we talked about all of these. The one that I'll just point out is the Agile RF Systems. We've been working with them since 2017, since they started in their home. We found them space on the 2nd floor of OKC Products, and they built the 10,000 square foot building that they're in today. This photo is them showing that radar equipment to about 20 people from the Air Force. And they're gonna purchase that equipment. And they were there 2 months ago. And we were invited to come and be there when they all were there. And Keith and Kim Kelly were very proud to be able to show us this and this activity. But this all started with them working out of their home here in Berthoud back in 2015-16.
Walt, didn't we help them get a grant to construct their new facility?
Good point. We helped them get 2 grants. First one was for $500,000, and the second one was for $250,000. By helping them, we wrote letters of support and contacting OEDIT. That's who the grant was submitted to, expressing our support for their grant application. So, yeah, it was 2 different grants. The first one was $500,000. The second one was $250,000. Good point, Chris. I mentioned this before, in economic development in northern Colorado, especially with Berthoud, I work in tandem with our partners. And one of our primary partners is Upstate Colorado. And they administer the READY program, which is the Regional Economic Development Initiative. And it's bringing all of the economic development professionals in northern Colorado, Weld and Larimer counties, coming together, working for a common goal, and that is to retain and attract business in northern Colorado. So I have asked Rich to come up, and you want to just,
We'd like to have our
Pardon?
2025 Ready Chair.
oh, that's right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ferguson. So READY, we call it No Code Ready, or just READY for short. It's a collaborative of all the economic developers in the region. And so we do work on things where we're attracting and promoting things in the entire region. A lot of that comes to looking at attracting businesses, primary employers mostly. Set this somewhere. So a primary employer is defined as a company that is exporting a good or service 50% or more outside of our region. The reason that we go after these employers is because they create jobs, and those jobs allow folks to pay for their house and you know, buy retail goods and things like that and live life. So that's where we have found alignment. Obviously, retail is done more on the local level, but we've had great success. We did the business survey. We continue to do that to understand kind of where we're at kind of in the region with our businesses. COVID really propelled our activity. We've been working for a long time, but when it comes to regional responses, as one region, a unified response for Northern Colorado, we'd been talking about it, but we didn't have time anymore when COVID hit. We had to support business the best we could. So in that came efficiency. We've been improving that process ever since, and we've had great success. I think the first year we started, we did 13 regional leads, and now we are at 47. So great success. What's great about this is that it allows us to promote all of the assets in Northern Colorado, not just our community. Anything else on that on No Code Ready?
Just how we focus on clusters versus.
So 2020, we did a cluster study. And a cluster is not, aside from an industry, it is a group of industries that work together, supply chain. So if you have, let's say a manufacturer, that manufacturer is gonna need metal or plastics or other components, where they're all contributing to a finished good. That is what we're looking to support within a cluster. There's also a shared workforce within this cluster. So in 2020, we did a cluster study collaboratively in Northern Colorado and discovered our key clusters for growth are going to be manufacturing, food processing and manufacturing, plastics, so injection molding manufacturing, distribution, e-commerce, IT plus, which is technology, software, all of that. It's kind of encompassing, as well as bioscience and biomedical device manufacturing and support. So that's really what grounds us in the work that we're doing and how we work collaboratively to really go after those industries for the region. Communities are going to have their own additional clusters and industries that appeals to them and that they're looking to bring in. But we have found as a region, that's where we're going to have success and build from there. When we did our update in we did it this year, but it's for the 2023 numbers. Everything looks like it's on trajectory. That first cluster study that we did is panning out. It is going in the direction that we thought it would go in. The only addition that we really saw was going to be in business services, which it's not surprising. Businesses need a variety of different services to include management and other technical support. So that's been really great. Again, as communities are going after their own projects to, from primary to retail to housing, this really grounds us in our regional collaboration to ensure that we are aligning on what we work on collaboratively and then where we deviate. So it's been a great success.
And the research that they do really helps me a great deal because one, I don't have to do it. Two, I don't have the resources to do it. They do. And we partner very closely together, and I'll show you in another couple slides how we do that even further. But Upstate's is a great partner with communities like Berthoud, smaller communities that don't have the staff or the resources to do the kind of research and activities that they
Okay, to ask a question.
Victor, you wanted a conversation, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
What's the definition of region?
Weldon, Larimer County. For
Weldon
Northern
Larimer?
Colorado. Yeah, Weldon,
Okay.
Larimer.
And then you may get to this, but are you happy with our current growth, and are we comparable to other towns of our size with the growth we're getting from a commercial, I guess? I don't know if industrial is the right word.
I think it's a relative question because it's whatever could we be growing faster? Depends, is that what you, I mean,
So
maybe.
if we're happy with our growth and
Yeah.
we're great and that's the norm, and as we look at other towns, we're comparable, we're right there. If we're not, then my next question would be, why? And my question maybe to these folks might even be, are we a user-friendly town for commercial
We're gonna get to
businesses?
that.
Okay, yeah,
That's a
great.
great question. No, that is fundamentally, that is a great question for any economic development activity, any community, because it does make a difference. And I'm not gonna dwell on this, but if you think of Berthoud between 2000 and 2010 versus 2015 to today, and you ask the development community, the commercial brokers, is there a difference between the previous decade and currently? I'm sure they're gonna say yes. And that's why you're seeing all this development that's taken place since 2015. But to further answer your question, I guess, each community is different. I mean, each one of us is different. That's what makes Northern Colorado really cool, I think. Berthoud is not Windsor. Berthoud is not Fort Collins, just like they're not us. And so however you all in the community decides we want to grow or don't want to grow, it's a decision we make as a community. How that impacts economic development, why do it does? It can. If we were, I'm not saying we need to be or should be, but if we are a community on a fast growth projection, and instead of 13,000 today, we had 20,000. That's a whole different conversation when it comes to retail. It is. You become more attractive to the retail business, and Brian will touch on this in a few minutes when he comes up. But that's not to say we need to be there as a community. It's whatever we decide as a community of what we want to be and who we are. The surveys that we did, I left on your desk. And we've done a number of them. Recently, we've done like 3 different surveys. This one was for our downtown, but one of the things that people, and we had close to 600 responses in that survey. And there was a couple things that stood out. One, they like the quaintness and the historic nature of our downtown. They'd like to see the vacant storefronts filled, although we don't have many of them. And they want more restaurants, and they want more retail and activities. So the question is, how do we do all of that? Or can we do all of that if we're going to be a community of 13,000 people? Or that's why I say it's a different conversation. But it's not an either or. It's what the community wants. But it does make a difference when it comes to economic development, whether it's manufacturing or retail.
And I will say, if I may, the question of are we happy with the amount of growth that we're getting, I think Walt's right. That's a relative question, right? And it depends on perspective. The reality of government funding in Colorado, municipal funding in particular, is that sales tax is the majority of our revenue. We'll talk about that obviously during our budget meetings, and if you've sat through my awful budget presentations in the past, you know that sales tax makes up about 2/3 of our general fund revenue. And so retail sales tax, if you have a lot of residential growth and you don't have retail sales tax growth behind it with new retail businesses, you're going to struggle to provide services over the long haul, because houses don't pay for themselves unless they're spending money at retail establishments in your community. Now, some of that has changed, thankfully, because of South Dakota versus Wayfair. The Supreme Court decision allowed sales taxes to be collected on online retail sales that are delivered in your community. And so we did get we got a significant bump in retail sales tax after that decision. But that's kind of leveled off. And so more people means more sales tax. But it can't only be driven by online sales, because still the majority of retail takes place at brick and mortar stores. And so retail sales tax growth is important to the long-term health and success of the community. And there's an interesting balance, right? You've got some communities, I think everybody knows Johnstown has an abundance of retail commercial, probably out of scale with their residential growth. And so they're doing exceptionally well financially. I think they granted their utility funds. I'm gonna get this wrong, so don't quote me on this. But I was talking to Matt Lassurf, their town administrator, and he was kind of lamenting the fact they had to grant their utility funds some money out of their general fund. And he was like, man, I'm just, now we're only gonna have $67 million in the general fund, or some absurd number. And that was after they'd granted $50 million, or whatever that number was, some huge number. And so I was kind of laughing with him, like, well, that's great. That's still 3 times what we have in our general fund reserve, so kudos to you. And that's driven by regional retail sales, right? Where other people are spending money in their town that don't live there. We have the reverse. We have retail leakage, and that means we have a lot of people that live here that are spending money somewhere else. And so the more of that we can capture here locally, the better off we'll be. But there has to be a significant critical mass of retail sales to justify that kind of new investment, because retail development is very expensive. On the industrial side, it's a little different, right? Industrial development, depending on the nature of what that industrial business is, can generate some great property taxes. It can generate great job growth and wage growth that then obviously translates your kind of indirect ways into additional retail sales tax and other things. But I think a good, healthy community has a mix of all of it, right? It's not just an industrial town. It's not just a regional retail town. Really great communities have all of it.
And if we were way off the beaten path, that would be one thing, but if you extrapolate these traffic numbers times 7, that's 500,000 cars on I-25, right? That's well over 100,000 on 287. Those are respectable numbers, right? I mean, I think that's some pretty good traffic around our
287 is
town.
about 19,000 cars a day. Is that what you're looking
I'm
at?
saying times 7.
Yes.
So in a week,
Yeah,
Yes.
you're well over 100,000 cars a week.
Yep.
That's a respectable number.
Yes. In a minute or two, not a minute, Ryan's gonna speak more on the retail, Ryan Schaefer. So we'll get through this, and then Rich is gonna talk more about the primary employment and how they work to address both of Chris' points that he just made. So we're gonna get to all of that, but feel free to ask the questions.
Thank you.
Ask them the questions.
Appreciate it.
Because they are good, and we do want to hear them. This next slide, I just want to give you a quick thumbnail of I say the website, this is the property search capability on our website. If we could just bring this up real quick. And the reason this is not unique, but one thing that it's embedded in this website is Esri data, and it's current. And there's different types of data that can be generated from this information. And this is what I often walk through prospective retailer who may already have this information, or a manufacturer. And if we can get to it, if not, we can just pass.
Let's try.
It keeps wanting to switch, but it's just not cooperating.
That's okay, we can move on. That's all right. But there's a lot of useful information on this this page of our site search. So if you're looking for any current demographic, whether it's traffic counts, leakage analysis, retail sales, it's on this web. We have it embedded in this website. All right, just want to show you visually where our development opportunities are and some of the challenges that are with most of these sites. I'm not going to go through all of them. You're going to know, up by Heron Lakes, Prairie Star, Heron Lakes Commercial, and Ryan Schaefer and his company has 2 listings remaining there. That you had Revere before you a couple months or a couple meetings ago. West Side Crossing, they're moving dirt, putting in the infrastructure. Gateway, Berthoud Commons, looks like could be, those 2 sites, 6A and B, 6A and 6B could be coming back online. There's the Farmstead, not at I-25, that MNC Real Estate, but most of that property is in the floodplain. In fact, pretty much all of it. And there's like 4 sites right along 56 that are partially in the floodplain. So they have to move more dirt onto those, but they can be developed. There's challenges there. Of course, Turion came before you guys 2 years, 3 years ago. And they haven't, as far as I know, they've been looking at having communication discussions about the water, getting water to the site, but they haven't submitted any sort of site plans or anything with that site. And then there's Jackson Industrial, which is it's a great site. And then the Weibel Industrial Park up on Clayton Place, and then there's that 16-acre site right south of that on Clayton Place. All of these sites have potential and opportunities. And then also Jake, Ryan, a colleague of Ryan's, they have the site to I-25, the northwest corner, and that's about 51 acres. The Jackson, just using Jackson Industrial Site, it's a beautiful site. It's been sitting there before I got here. 58 acres, very flat. There's utilities around it that need to be upgraded, but there's all utilities around it. One of the issues that makes that site a little difficult is the developer, the owner, wants to sell the whole site. He doesn't want to be a developer. Doesn't want to put hardly any money into it, if any money at all into it. So it's going to take a company, probably in partner with us, to purchase the entire 58 acres, put in the roads, put in the infrastructure, probably upgrade the electrical lines to it, sewer line to it. And that's a big investment, especially when the inquiries come through, like through upstate Colorado, and a company may need 50 acres. There's one on my desk right now, 50 acres or 60 acres or 70 acres. But in their mind, they're looking for a 68-acre site or 58-acre site that pretty much has all that in there already. It's not that they have to invest in the roads, in the upgrade of the water and sewer, in the electric potential if it's a big electrical user. That's not something that they are thinking about, that additional investment that they would have to make their site attractive to them. But that's the limitation with Jackson Industrial right now. The 2 sites up at Clayton Place, that's they've been up there, they've been sitting there. Jay Weibel wants to really develop that, probably 23 acres as soon as he can. We're working on the sewer line and the water line that goes through there, but there's some infrastructure upgrades that need to have happen there. And then at out 287 West Side Crossing, they're moving dirt right now. They're putting in the infrastructure, so we're out there marketing, helping their broker market that site, so that we can bring in maybe hopefully some retailers, commercial establishments on that site. Gateway, we've had a number of projects before us for Gateway. Throughout the past 3 or 4 years, just working, trying to make that work for a particular development. So all of these sites have potential. Very few of them are really what you would consider shovel-ready, ready to go. West Side Crossing may be the closest to that, and Legacy Park, if it continues to go through the site planning process, would be the closest things we have at this point. And then, the former town hall property we're looking at, the former Sunoco building we're looking at, and before you, a few meetings ago, we presented Asher Architects, and they're working with us to come up with a plan for the former public works site. So that should be coming back to you in the very near future. Any questions about any of this?
Yeah, so with Gateway, I just know 2 apartment, but we have other than apartment applications for that area.
We've had others.
Yeah.
Yep.
The site, if you look at the map, Gateway's identified both on the kind of the west side and the east side. The west side, we've had a lot of retail or commercial interest in, and that was a unique site because it hadn't been subdivided yet, and so they hadn't dealt with things like stormwater detention and curb gutter and sidewalk and some basic infrastructure things. Those are getting dealt with now, and so we actually expect to see some good movement interest there. The one on the east side, closer to Berthoud Parkway, it has some very unique allowed uses in the original PUD zoning. And so it's not what I would say is kind of traditional commercial retail. And it does have some access challenges because of the Highway 56 access control plan that CDOT has adopted. And so the one on the east side is less likely to develop in a retail commercial kind of way. It may have some mixed use, and we've really pushed that with the prospective developers that we've seen. So, you know, if there's some residential on site, or, you know, if it's medical offices or things that maybe are lower traffic generators, that we still have some small retail space, you know, sandwich shop, coffee shop, that kind of stuff. So kind of in a mixed use fashion, but I would expect to see more retail commercial development, and we've certainly had more interest on the western side of Gateway Park Boulevard.
On that number one, Weevil Industrial, is there a baseball field on that right now? And a
It's
bunch
just north of it.
Bunch of overflow cars? Okay,
No, that baseball field is just north of
Just-
Weibel.
okay.
But where the cars are parked
Yep.
is a part of that
Yes.
ground, yeah, so.
They own the 5 acres on First Street, plus I think it is the 16 or 18 acres behind it.
When that property was annexed, it was zoned transitional, and transitional just means you can continue what the current uses were on the property when it was annexed. But if you ever want to do anything else, you have to rezone.
Got it.
And it was a car lot when it was originally annexed, so they've been allowed to continue to park cars there. But they're going through the planning process to do what looks like a really nice industrial park.
So this is the most recent activity that's come through my office. 74 inquiries for site building information. A lot of those inquiries come through upstate Colorado. There's a few that come to us directly or through a broker, but the vast majority of these come through upstate Colorado or state of Colorado. Most of them, as you can see, are eliminated pretty quick. We either don't have a building for them, we don't have a lot of buildings, or we don't have the site to meet their needs. So they're eliminated relatively quick.
And I will, maybe while that's a good time to pause too, if you don't mind me interrupting
Nope.
just for a minute, but a lot of the inquiry, why can I not say that word? Inquiries that we get are for existing space. And so, as you can imagine, building new from the ground up is expensive, and so it has to be a very dedicated, has to be a well-funded user and somebody that is really committed to that, to building their own facility and doing it in Berthoud. And when there are folks looking for existing space, we don't have much. The existing industrial space that we have gets leased up pretty quickly. Even up on the north end of Clayton Place, there are a couple of very large buildings. Those came off the market pretty fast.
That's the biggest headwind?
Yeah, is existing space. The same is true for a lot of retail developments. So we do get interest from unique restaurants and retail, and we just don't have space. Restaurant in particular, you know, we get a lot, people call all the time, or maybe not call, but in meetings and when we do community outreach events, we'll hear a lot, like, why don't we have this restaurant? Why can't we get more restaurants downtown? Why don't we, you know, why do we only have Mexican and pizza? And we get, or beer, and we get a lot of requests, and Walt's taken several regional restaurateurs and on tours in downtown, and a lot of them have expressed interest, but there's no space, and so
When you say
getting that
When you
space.
use that word, you're not talking about literally a building existing, or are you?
I am,
You
yeah,
are,
that's
okay.
exactly what I mean.
Okay,
Yeah, so there may be available ground to develop,
right.
but what they're often looking for is existing building
Okay.
space, and so we just don't have much.
Yeah.
And when it does come available, it gets snapped up pretty fast. The Bertha Drug Store, that building sold as soon as Bertha Drug moved out, and we will be meeting with the new owners. They don't have plans for it yet, not specific. They have some ideas about things they may want to do there. But that's just about the only,
Are there anything, is it, again, maybe you'll get
primary
into this, so
retail
shut me off, please, but are there credits we can give? Are there tax abatements, or, I mean, are we constantly looking at opportunities like that?
I
Yeah,
agree
yeah.
with
Walt did prepare an incentive policy a couple of years ago that the town board presented, or approved, excuse me, was presented to the town board and was approved. And that gives us at least a toolbox of things that we can offer to prospective builders and developers and businesses. And so we, you know, we offer those things, obviously contingent upon town board approval. But within the context of that plan, we feel, or that policy, we feel pretty confident that those would be supported by the town board. And in a lot of cases, that doesn't move the needle as much as you would think it would.
So why is it that we seem to be having issues with people building commercial? Because I know we've had at least several meetings in here where a developer want to come in and they want to take their commercial spot and put more houses there. It's like,
Right.
we need the commercial space, and if we're getting rid of it that quick, why is it that they want to come and build houses instead?
The simple reality
It's
is, because we're a very attractive bedroom community, they can sell houses a lot faster than they can sell retail space. And
But
so,
you just said that the commercial space is going away quickly.
well, and in most cases, the developer doesn't build anything. So the vast majority of our developments in town, they do the paper lot development, so they go through the planning processes and get everything rezoned and subdivided. They'll do infrastructure, and then they sell lots to businesses or builders to do the actual construction and long-term ownership. And so it is very easy to sell residential lots right now. It's a lot harder to sell commercial lots in town, even though, because, and I think that there's a difference between retail businesses who are looking for space, who also do not have the money to build, and commercial developers, right?
Yeah, that's something we need to help out with both.
So
Yeah.
what are we doing to recruit commercial developers? People that want to build commercial buildings?
Yeah.
Where are they? And why aren't they selling to us to take up a lot of this vacant land
So,
and want to turn housing into commercial property?
so we look for a variety of different avenues, and I'll let Walt talk more about this. I probably shouldn't be weighing in so much, but you know, like Walt's met with, and we've toured, and I've participated in some of those meetings, folks that do smaller retail development, and that's kind of their niche. In a lot of cases, they do some really cool redevelopment work, or they'll do kind of infill in downtowns. And a lot of folks are really interested in Berthoud. But it still feels like a risky market to them on that smaller side. And on the really bigger regional side, 287 has some really good traffic, but it's nothing like I-25. And so the really big retail development seems to be going to those higher population centers, bigger population centers, and higher traffic areas. And so we're right on the cusp of that. West Side Crossing, that developer said they had 7 letters of intent signed. And so I think that as that space gets constructed and as some of that development occurs, I think we will start to see some of that, but some of it is like taking the risk, right? Somebody's got to take the risk. It really helped when Berthoud Commons or Heron Lakes Commons up at where Taco Bell and Come and Go, and well, it's Maverick now, Taco Bell, Maverick, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, that shop, when all that shopping started to get developed, it actually spurred some additional interest. But somebody had to be kind of the first one in the pool.
There's 4 or 5 lots sitting right there that haven't done anything in multiple years either.
And so there is still some good lots available there. There's infrastructure now that's all built. And as you appropriately pointed out, there's still some hesitancy there to kind of build.
So how do we
space.
get the incentives in here without giving away? Because I've seen some of these incentives come in where they don't want to pay sales tax for 15, 20 years or something like that. And it's just like, well, that's the whole point of having you come here and build is so we have our sales tax revenue, and yet you want this incentive to come here and build and then not give us anything in return. So it's kind of a catch-22, darned if you do, darned if you don't.
We'll talk about that a little bit, I think, as we go on tonight.
Maybe we should just go through these presentations. I think we all have
Yeah.
questions, and then we can
Yeah.
discuss afterwards.
This is
So
good
a lot of this
discussion,
is
but-
gonna, as Ryan comes up and talks about retail, I think a lot of your questions are gonna be addressed. Ryan does have his firm has 3 sites, 3 listings in Berthoud, or 1 or 2. One up in Heron Lakes, commercial, and one on I-25. Rich does work all over the region, so when I'm finished, they're gonna come up and give you more insight. But Tim has a good questions, that we're gonna get to.
Okay.
So we have 9 active. By 9 active, I mean, they haven't said no, and they're still pursuing, and our site or building might be of interest to them. So I still consider active, If it's inactive, I haven't heard from in a while. And so I'll try reaching out to them. Sometimes we don't get any response back. I don't take it off my list, but I consider it inactive. And this is where I'm gonna have Rich come up, not yet, but when I'm finished, and she'll talk about all of this primary employment, business attraction work that he does and how that plays into what kind of work that I do. From that, we have, as Chris said, we've had a restaurant owner, activity center type of use in Berthoud, I think 2 times. He's on a Zoom meeting a 3rd time. They're interested in Berthoud. They're interested in a particular site in Berthoud.
Is this a pickleball restaurant? 'Cause I know
No, it's pickleball.
It's a restaurant activity center is an interesting description.
But you'll see in one of my slides, that's becoming much more and more popular with restaurants.
Okay,
Standalone restaurants. There's some sort of activity associated with it.
yeah,
And this would be one of those.
okay.
And they're considering Berthoud, the site that they came up and looked at twice with Chris and I. Started out with a Zoom meeting initially. We intrigued perked their interest. And how I found out about that, I was reading, I think it was a Denver Business Journal, and they were doing a project in Aurora, or I think it was Aurora. And I thought that would go well in Berthoud. So I contacted the company. Lo and behold, they responded. And they've since been up twice. And we had the 3rd Zoom meeting. And there's some interest in Berthoud. The site they're looking at is one that gets, we'll see if it's gonna work. But if that doesn't work, we're looking at other alternatives for them. And then we had another restaurant owner in town, looking at the community in general primarily, to see if we would be a good fit for them. And looking at a particular site as well. So there's interest. I can perk their interest to come and look. But they're also pulling up the demographics, as Ryan will touch on in a few minutes. Demographics play a big part in what a retailer is going to do or don't do. For a lot of them, it's for a primary employer, we can try to sell them on the region. You can locate in Berthoud, and you're going to draw employees from Fort Collins, from Loveland, from Longmont, maybe even from Denver. Retailers, it's a whole different ballgame, and Ryan will touch on that. It's drive times or distances, and how many people are within 5 miles, how many people live within 10 minutes. And they look at the drive and the traffic numbers and all of that. And it's hard to persuade them that those numbers aren't correct, or within our trade area, which we often do. We look at the trade area, not just Berthoud, which pulls in more numbers, but even that can be a tough sell for certain retailers. Other activities, I mentioned the DDA initiative, we're working on that. Downtown survey, I left copies of that for you. As I mentioned, what's also interesting about that survey, the vast majority of the respondents come to downtown more than once a week. When you think about that, that's 600 responses, and that's just a small portion of the community. And they're telling us they come to downtown more than once a week. So I shared that with our retailers on Mountain Avenue, saying there could be an opportunity here. If they're coming more than once a week, that gives you an opportunity to even sell them even more, and to upsell them, and hopefully get others downtown. So the information, and this is going to go up on our website as well. We'll begin to share that. Just these last 3 slides, Tim, you talked about, or Chris mentioned, what do companies look for? Where the leads come from. I track all of that data. I have it on in my database. A little small here to see, but this gives you an idea of the kind of information I track, where the prospects are coming from, what they're looking for, how much, and what size acreage they're looking for, and generally it's about 25 to 30 acres or smaller. Business is 25,000 square feet generally. The vast majority of the inquiries we get are from like 10,000 to 30,000 square feet if they're looking for existing buildings. And that's one of the things that's attractive to Berthoud. When sites become available, or space becomes available on our 2nd Street or 1st Street, as Chris said earlier, it goes quick. It doesn't stay on the market. They find it. Businesses will come, I just got a call from a business from Longmont, 4:30 this afternoon. And they found a building on Second Street that they were asking me about, that they've been up once already to look at. And they're very interested in this building, but they found this. And so when building space is on the market, you know, the smaller space, in Berthoud, it goes really, really quick. And that's one of the things that Jay Weibel's looking at too. Weibel, he's looking at building like 2,500 square foot industrial buildings to lease, multiple buildings on that site. He's recognized that there is a demand for that space, 2,500 to 5,000 square feet. And he's gonna build it when he's able to up on Clayton Place.
What's the average rent in town?
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. For industrial space, Rich might have a better handle on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I can get that for you though.
102?
Approximately $12
Oh.
a year for industrial.
Thank you, Ryan. Yep. Some other data that I track, acreage request, square feet. Most of the inquiries are for buildings, as Chris alluded to. And that's where, you know, we just don't have a lot of space. It doesn't stay on the market long. The one building that's been on the market is the Lehman, it hasn't been on that long either. Lehman Printing Building, it's 66,000 square feet. There's inquiries, there was interest in that building too. But it is kind of
Did you
unique.
say 68,000?
Yeah.
That's a big building.
It is a big one. Yep. Mhm. It's been on the market for maybe a year or so. But it'll go. It'll go as well. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the kind of work I do on a daily basis, track everything that I do, outreaching quite a bit to the commercial brokers, restaurant owners, retailers, promoting the sites that we do have, which along Mountain, there's quite a few. Some are more, as I mentioned, some are more ready than others. But one of the things that the retailers do look at, is we talked about this earlier, and Ryan will touch on this, is where the community is going in terms of our overall growth. So for the retailer, that does bring into their mind their question about a different community, whether they want to, you know, build a building in that community, take a risk. Retail is a risk, whether you're in Fort Collins maybe or Berthoud or Windsor. It is risk, and whether they want to make that risk in Berthoud or Longmont or Loveland or whatever. So a lot depends on where we're headed with in terms of our growth. You know, I think our build out, if you take into account the land on the east side of First Street, if all that gets annexed and built out over the next 20 to 30 years, I think we're looking at about 35 to 40,000 people potentially. But that's over long term. That's not going to happen tomorrow. That's over the course of maybe 20 to 30 years, if all of that begins to happen.
Over 30, 40 years, would we ever see 56 looking like Eisenhower?
So I mean, I think
There's 3
probably
miles
not.
of ag out there.
I don't think so.
That's why I'm asking the question.
It just depends who's in charge.
There is about a mile and a half of farmland already preserved on the north side of the road.
Mhm.
There's opportunities potentially on the south side of the road over the long term. Our comprehensive plan kind of suggests that most of the land between I-25 and town will kind of remain rural in character. Not to say it won't be developed, but I don't think it will ever. You know, the board could fire me and then adopt a new comp plan tomorrow, and I have no idea what that might look like.
We don't need to fire you to adopt. a new
Well,
comp.
you can keep me, you can
Yes,
keep
we
me and
can.
adopt a new comp plan. I might not agree with it, but,
No, and I wasn't suggesting it, I left here a long, long time ago and Eisenhower didn't look
If
like
you look at the
Eisenhower.
comp plan, that whole area east of primarily County Line Road is agriculture.
and kind of intended to stay that way for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Not to say that 20 years from now, that vision might be different and the community might feel very differently. I don't know. Some of that will likely be preserved in perpetuity and couldn't be developed. Like I said, there's a large swath of conservation easement on the north side of 56 already.
Mhm.
And I would expect there to be some along the south side of 56 as well.
Yeah, and we just talk about a strong town having a certain percentage of commercial, certain percent of ag, certain percent of residential, and that's the kind of stuff we're doing in our planning.
I
so,
think,
great.
that long-term, I think a challenge for the board, probably not, whoever's sitting in your seats, is how are we gonna link I-25 when it does develop to our core downtown?
Yep.
And that's what the Mountain Avenue Corridor Plan attempts to do, is to create that linkage so that what happened in Loveland years ago with Centerra and downtown being two distinct areas, which is now it's filled in over the years, but our Mountain Avenue Corridor Plan, the way it's designed, is to create that linkages between I-25 and Old Town Berthoud. And I think that's gonna be pretty important, because eventually all those four corners out of I-25 are in Berthoud. Granted, the southwest corner has some challenges, being that it's all in the floodplain. Pretty much all of it. So with that, I got a few more slides on retail that's gonna be an intro for Ryan. Ryan's gonna come up and give you the Paul Harvey version on retail activity in and around northern Colorado, as well as Berthoud. Then after Ryan, Rich is gonna come up and give you more insights on the activity that upstate Colorado does and how they interface with us. Okay? So trends in retail marketing, Ryan's gonna probably touch on a lot of this real quick.
Is yours totally off?
Yeah,
Oh, is it a cable maybe?
just when it was glitching, it never came back. It's all good.
As Chris mentioned, COVID got all of us shopping online, drive-throughs, but brick and mortar is still relevant today. But with brick and mortar, and Ryan will talk about this, it's a little different today than it was pre-COVID. Single-tenant developments still less risky, pre-leased generally, and they continue to move forward. That may look familiar. This is not in Berthoud. I didn't take this picture of Berthoud, but we have this in Berthoud. Looks very similar. Just wanted to show you this other one. Does this look familiar? This is not a picture of Berthoud up at Heron Lakes Commercial. But this is the kind of retail service center that's being developed all over. So what we have in Berthoud is very common with what is happening in different parts of the country. That's Aki Palmer's development up at Heron Lakes Commercial.
Do you get feedback on businesses that have opened? So Starbucks, right, seems like there's cars going through all day long. Taco Bell, McDonald's, the gas station. How's their traffic? Do you get any feedback after the
Not
fact?
unless I ask them. I go up and talk to them.
Okay.
But I need to talk to generally the people that are working in.
Sure.
It's the real estate director or whomever.
Are
Yes.
the business owners happy with the traffic?
Pretty much,
they're getting?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yep. Trends in restaurant. Most restaurants are shrinking their footprints, focusing on pickup, as we all know. One of our challenges, and it's not a challenge, it's part of our Mountain Avenue Corridor Overlay Plan. Now, we don't allow drive-through along Mountain Avenue, which is fine. It's what we decided as a community. But for some restaurants and retailers, that's a challenge. We just need to be aware of that.
How did we do Ziggy's then? What do you mean? Oh, like directly drive on? 'Cause we do have
Ziggy's was
drive on.
done before.
Ziggy's was pre-Mountain Avenue plan, so the Mountain Avenue overlay plan doesn't actually prohibit drive-throughs, but it can't be on the Mountain Avenue side of the building, which effectively prohibits drive-throughs, because the building has to be on Mountain Avenue, and if you have to put the drive-through on the other side of the building, you basically have to put the drive-through between the parking lot and the building, which doesn't work, practically speaking. So, for all intents and purposes, at least within that 150 foot from the center line of the Mountain Avenue overlay, you can't do drive-through. There are some creative ways you could. We've offered some of those, especially in a mixed-use context. So you could actually do some really cool stuff. Some good examples in like Estes Park and some other places. But anyway, for a traditional drive-through restaurant, those won't work on Mountain Avenue.
I think we need a drive-through donut shop at that little bank site on 4th Street. You know what I'm talking
That'd be
about?
awesome.
Behind Ace. Like, I was like, that'd be a great donut drive-through.
That
Don't you
would be a
think?
great donut drive-through.
It doesn't have to have a big footprint, just little guy.
The next slide, I just want to quickly, Chris and I talk about this all the time. When you go to a conference like ICSC, the National Council of Shopping Centers out in Las Vegas, which we go to, and Chris has been with me. Oftentimes, we're just using Jersey Mike's as an example, but whether it's Chick-fil-A, Jersey Mike's, they all have sheets like this that says what it takes to attract them to a location and what they're looking for, what their traffic counts need to be, what the population needs to be. Each one's different. It could be 10-minute drive time, 5-minute drive time. It could be drive times and getting distance. Each one is a little bit different. And the point here is it's different recruiting retail than it is primary employers. You know, it's a science for retail. They don't deviate too much from their stated requirements. They might do that, and Ryan will touch more on this, for an area maybe that's more isolated than a community like Berthoud, where you are the center, the commercial center of maybe a rural area. But they pretty much stick to whatever their criteria is.
Well, don't mean to interrupt. Do you find this is true for even regional or national chains, essentially mom and pop shops? Are they?
That's different. Mom and
Okay.
pops I'm not even sure if they have, in their mind, they kind of know what works for them.
It's more of a gut feel or.
Yes, and that's, the calls I make, or the meetings I have with mom and pops, and it's a different conversation.
Okay.
Okay. Now I'm gonna ask Brian to come up, and if that's okay, any more questions? Brian's gonna give you more of the Paul Harvey version.
I'm gonna grab seconds. So.
Yeah, everybody take a sec and grab some food while you're, and Ryan, come on up. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you on the way up. No problem.
You've just been upstaged by tacos.
Yeah. The chips and guacamole is really good, by the way, just saying.
Just for him too, I don't
Yeah, I know, I feel bad. I hate when people like chew next to me and I'm the one that's doing it.
This is part of the deal. For the whole world to see.
Mindful that we talk about specific retailers.
That's probably fair.
Yeah.
NAI Affinity is a commercial real estate brokerage company. We also have a sister development company. We've been in business for 21 years. I've been in the business for about 26. Prior to founding this company, I worked at McWhinney for a period of time, and some of my experiences displayed on your monitors there. I'm a Colorado native, and actually I'm a proud Berthoud resident as of 2 years ago. So glad to be here. Some of my experiences noted. When I was at McWhinney, I brokered the joint venture between McWhinney and Pogan McEwen to develop the promenade shops at Centerra. I helped do quite a bit of the leasing and the tours with real estate executives of large retailers, in some cases they're C-level executives, and helped kind of craft a strategy for McWhinney to win that deal. We were competing with several others around the region at that time. I'm the former owner of, along with some partners, of the land where Shields is located at I-25 and 34. Also did quite a bit of fee development work on the neighboring property out there. I've completed transactions with Lowe's Home Improvement Centers, brokered the land for Medical Center of the Rockies at Centerra. I've done deals with Kroger, Swire Coca-Cola, Bonefish, Texas Roadhouse, some of those others you see here. I think Walt asked me to do this because he attended an Urban Land Institute presentation that I spoke at, and the topic really was what happened out at I-25 and 34 and some of the history there. I realized that might not be perfectly relevant to your goals here in Berthoud, but I'm happy to talk about it in the context of we had a strategy and we had a plan, and I think that's applicable to different ways of doing things as well. So the 2534 mixed-use master plan community is about 600 acres. That does not include Thompson River Ranch, which is adjacent, and Oakwood Homes has got roughly 1,500 homes there as well. 2534 consists of about 2 million square feet of commercial and industrial space today. About 850,000 of that is retail. There are roughly 1,200 apartments and 300 single-family homes there as well. So this is what that area looked like back in 2000. We used to get these aerials taken by aircraft, and we had giant books of them. None of them were on the internet back then. This kind of overlays where Medical Center of the Rockies is, the promenade shops at Centerra and Shields. For some context, when I left McWhinney, I needed work, and the property owners needed somebody to help them pull this together. And so it was a pretty good partnership. We kind of quarterbacked the team and did fee development where we hired all the consultants, we managed them. We implemented a marketing and branding strategy. We helped get a market-driven land use plan in place. We helped the town create what many would refer to as a PUD, basically a zoning document that we called the 2534 Design Guidelines that featured expedited planning approvals. It encouraged quality and compatibility, but it was also rapid. It was transparent. We had a fee structure online that everybody could see, and really allowed this community to absorb, from a commercial perspective, faster than anything else we'd seen in Northern Colorado's history from a commercial development perspective. I kind of talked about some of this a little bit here a moment ago, but this was really the strategy out at 2534. We had a market-driven land use plan that identified land uses, but it also allowed for some flexibility for us to react to market conditions. Access and visibility was very important, and we worked to get access permits with CDOT and negotiate right-of-ways and setbacks that allowed for the area to develop the way it did. We had reasonable and transparent pricing. We were about 10% below our competition in many cases. The town of Johnstown was also a partner in all of this, and they had very reasonable fees. They had a transparent schedule posted online, which was unique back then. And it was all very easy when somebody came in the sense that it was transparent. We eliminated a lot of the mystery for end users, and that certainty and confidence in the process inspires people to invest.
Ryan, what were you getting pricing on? Sorry for this silly question.
The land area specifically. And
Someone to purchase the land or for these businesses to come in and lease the land?
they were purchases of land. In some cases, we developed buildings as well, but the
Okay.
land was what we basically were about 10% less than primarily McWhinney at the time at Centerra across the way. The developers of the property also took a significant risk. They installed a 20-inch water main about 7 miles from Johnstown. They built a sanitary sewer plant, and back then in 2004, installed about $15 million worth of on-site infrastructure that was critical backbone infrastructure. That'd be many times that today. This was kind of an early vision, and back then we had watercolor and colored pencils and stuff. Now this is rendered, but it looks remarkably similar to what's out there today. I can't get that exact angle because there apparently are some rules about flying drones too close to the airport, but you can kind of see what occurred there. Again, my point is not that this is necessarily right for Berthoud. That's for your residents and you all to decide, but it's an example of what can be done when there's good alignment between the development community, the brokerage community, the end users, and the town. Walt asked me to talk about economic development, really specifically retail attraction. So I'm happy to go through that tonight. Of course, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A to the extent you want to stay up. I'll be here. So really the question is why attract retail? And Chris mentioned earlier retail leakage. I think when you're a bedroom community like Berthoud is, that's a reality, that your residents are going somewhere else to shop a lot of times. And I've done some research on that. I'll share that momentarily. When you're able to capture those leaked sales and create more sales tax revenue, obviously that creates more resources for civic investment for your staff. If you're so inclined, you might even reduce fees or reduce taxes or something else. But it gives you tools that you have to enhance the community. I think it also has an important environmental and social benefit. If you reduce commuter traffic, people going back and forth to these other communities to shop, I think there's some enhancements to the natural environment as well. Getting into leakage, so this is the foremost example I can think of. This is I-25 and Harmony Road in Fort Collins. Long ago, the city of Fort Collins set an urban growth area that was I-25 was their boundary. They did not want to go east. They did everything that they could to kind of stop development east of there. Timnath annexed the property ultimately. Today, there are about $500 million in retail sales in Timnath at that intersection. It's staggering. Any guesses? I'm not meaning to be facetious, but any guesses about the trips that come from Timnath residents to these retailers, percentage-wise?
I don't know, that Walmart intersection is a nightmare. Like that planner did not, you can't get out of that Walmart.
They did a bad job of that, Mr. Mayor. I don't know how they approved it because there's only one way in and out. It's bad planning. I completely agree. So my point was that there are about 4% of the trips that go to those retailers from Timnath residents.
Sure.
About 50% of them are Fort Collins residents. So Fort Collins gets none of the sales tax, but they have to pay for all the roads on Harmony Road, people coming in and out and creating all that traffic burden. They have to respond to emergency incidents with firefighters and police presence. They have to staff up for that. And so that can be an example of what can happen if you're not willing to grow and the neighboring community is, and how that retail leakage can negatively impact your town, our town, if it's going across the street to somebody else. So I think this is probably, $10 to $15 million a year pretty easily in sales tax revenue. And it's a staggering sum, and that adds up over time. It compounds, it grows most years. Let me see here. I was just gonna scroll down. and see if I-
Costco does between 150 and 200 million a year each.
One shop.
I happen to know the number there. I've been informed we're streaming, so I'm not gonna share it because it comes from Costco directly.
You could do 4 million a week. I mean,
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a very good store for them. So, what does this mean for Berthoud? Well, we've got the advantage of some software that it's very Big Brother-esque. I hate it, but if it exists, we're gonna use it because it's an important tool for our clients. But we can look where where y'all lay your head at night with your cell phones, and we can track, visitation of different sites. We can look at retailers, we can see who cross-shops those. And I pulled up all these retailers because I was curious, I thought you all would be too. What percentage of King Soopers customers on Eagle Drive in Loveland are coming from Berthoud? What percentage of Sam's Club? What percentage of Target in Loveland or Berthoud? Or excuse me, Loveland or Longmont are coming from Berthoud. So you can see a lot of that data there. I went ahead and pulled average store volumes for those that are publicly traded. We can also look at that same software I was talking about, where these stores rank. It won't tell us their sales volumes, but it'll tell us where they rank in terms of the state and all the other stores, and where they rank nationally in terms of all the other stores. So we can, if we know the average, and we know that store's about average, it's pretty easy to figure out what they're doing in annual sales. And so, I think just on this slide, there's roughly $18 million in sales leakage from Berthoud every year. Next one here is grocery. And I think one of the key takeaways there is there's probably about, I think this says 12 and a half. I'm assuming that Whole Foods customers are Whole Foods customers regardless if you build another grocery store here or not. But generally speaking, I think there's somewhere around $13 million worth of sales tax leakage that's grocery specific. So Berthoud residents are leaving town every day. There's probably roughly $13 million in retail sales for just these grocers, not any others that they might be shopping at outside of your community. So this kind of brings up some key questions about, what does the town wish to attract? What type of retail? Where would they like it to be located? And obviously your comp plan addresses many of these things. I'm not gonna, recite your comp plan back to you, but I have read it as a resident, and I've read it again in preparation here tonight. I think you have a number of great sites. This is actually from your comp plan. I put the stars on there myself. And these are some of the areas that Walt had highlighted. So this is where we kind of get into the meat of it. And Walt and I have worked together for a long time back in his NCEDC days, and he does a great job on behalf of your community. He made several promises tonight of things I would get into, some of which are in my presentation, some of them are not. So I'm happy to address those questions if they come up, and if I can remember those, I'll try to work it in as well. But really, when we're talking about attracting retailers, I think it's important for you to identify your targets. What makes sense for this community? What do you value? What do you wish to have here? And then talk about specific types of businesses. From there, I think it's really important to understand what makes them successful. So we listen first, we investigate first. You really try to read their annual reports. If you want ChatGPT to do it, have it summarize it for you. But you can do that stuff and really try to understand what makes their site successful and what they're looking for. What a Nordstrom is looking for is very different than what a Quick Trip or a 7-Eleven or a O'Reilly Auto Parts might be looking for. And so you really need to understand who that target is, or what I would call our customer, and what are they interested in. And from there, you can start to form a strategy that addresses that. You can do the research, and that's really where I think you separate the wheat from the chaff in our business. Because some people, go a mile wide and inch deep, and others will really dive into it, and they can make a data-driven case to support those businesses or not in your community. After you make your case, you have to be prepared to improvise, adapt, and overcome. I mentioned earlier, I worked at McWhinney when we were competing for the Promenade Shops at Centerra Regional Mall, and there was a site up at I-25 and 392. I believe CBL and Associates out of Chattanooga, Tennessee had that one. There was another site up in Fort Collins that Bear Properties had under contract. And our challenge was to really make the case that we had access to the largest portion of the regional population, the 750,000 people that live in Larimer and Weld County. And we made the case that I-25 and 34 were your two major trade routes. The traffic count supported that in the region. We also drew circles and ran demographics around each of the sites, and we knew that the 20-mile radius and 15-minute drive times were the highest at I-25 and 34, so we could present that data. It wasn't a lot of used car salesman stuff. It was very specifically data-driven. And then we had the challenge of when these executives would come into town to visit it, they wanted to drive the market. That was our Achilles heel. How do you go from I-25 and 34 where the CEO for P.F. Chang shows up, looks at their broker, sees me, I'm like 24 years old, Chad McWhinney's 30, they're looking at us across the table like, who are these kids and why am I sitting in the middle of a cornfield? And how am I gonna drive this market? And so we came up with the idea to fly helicopter tours. And on a big project like that, the $3,000 a day it was in 2001 to rent a helicopter for a half a day and schedule a lot of meetings and get people up and going around was a small expense. And we did that because you had about 45 minutes with these people, maybe an hour. We could sit in the conference room for 15, 20 minutes, give them an introduction. They want to drive. Back then, they wanted to see as many Mercedes and BMWs as they can, and then they're out to know their customers were there. And so we couldn't possibly drive to Greeley and back, and drive to Fort Collins and back, and drive to Loveland, Longmont, Berthoud and back. It'd take 8 hours to go to and from. So we started flying helicopter tours, and it worked. And we got the deal done. That was one of the ways we did that. Now we've got technology that we can use a little differently. A few years back, there was a little invention called Google Earth you've heard of. Now with AI and ChatGPT and Alpha Maps and all these other tools, we can build data-driven approaches where we show them where their customers are, where there aren't. You've got two Sprouts stores on either side of you. You've got one in Longmont, you've got one in Loveland. Not more than 6% of their sales are coming from Berthoud residents. So that tells me that you can make a case possibly that you're not going to cannibalize those stores if you open another one here. Well, and it depends. The case changes whoever it is. Years ago with King Soopers, if they're doing a market study, it's how many net new households are they going to attract. Net new means they don't want to cannibalize their existing store, and they had a key number for that. So you got to kind of figure out what their metrics are and understand, do we fit that or not? And how do we make that case? So in the course of doing this, I mentioned earlier, you have to be prepared to improvise, adapt, overcome. That's where the whole helicopter thing came in. But in other examples, we're working on a deal with an anchor retailer that was looking up and down the 34 corridor. And, if they were to locate in Greeley, it was pretty easy, which was their preferred site, based upon spacing, to demonstrate that 16% of the customers, the Promenade Shops at Centerra, 17% of Shields, came east and drove west. So that was the established trade pattern. If you look at the people from Loveland and Johnstown that were going to Greeley to shop at Super Target, it's like 4%. So there's the obvious. People are going out to Medical Center of the Rockies, or going to I-25, they're going to Blue Federal Credit Union Arena. But then you can layer that with the data of these are actual retail visitations and make that case. And then it's your job to get into the details of what's the site look like in terms of access and visibility. When you're talking about anchor retail, you know, some of the incentives that you brought up earlier, Trustee Hardy, come into play. And that becomes a pretty big deal when all these communities are funded so heavily by sales tax. You don't have to give it all away, Trustee Kurtz. There's ways to do that. I think Berthoud's sales tax rate is about 4%. In a lot of this stuff, there's combinations of money that might be shared back to the developer for discounted sites. In some cases, you have public improvement fees that are layered on. It's an additional sales tax. Some communities have an appetite for that, some don't. Some retailers have an appetite for it, some don't. If they're a big discounter, they may not want much of a PIF on there. So that may or may not be a tool in your toolbox. But if you can't go there, what are the other incentives? We've seen people incentivized with fees, with water. Time is a big deal. All of those things kind of factor into the equation. And then I think it's important to be relentless, to be competitive. If you want to win one of these, you really don't give up unless it's on your terms, because it's highly competitive. And you'll be told no 7 times before you get to yes, maybe 10. And so that's a big part of that whole conversation. You want to be respectful when they say no, but you want to understand why. You want to ask follow-up questions. And without being annoying, you think about that stuff. You try to find the data to counter it and respond accordingly. So, you know, some of the high-level other factors that come into play, you know, obviously the economy and the market is a big part of this. I've told my investors and our brokerage clients at times that I'm not as dumb as they think I am when the economy's bad, and I'm not as smart as I think I am when things are going good. So the economy and the market matter a lot. I think that's 50% of success in this business. From there, obviously, you need to understand who the customers are of the retailer you're trying to attract. What's important to them? If you're Buc-ee's or Love's, sheer traffic counts on I-25 matter. If you're a specialty grocer, it might be more about high-income households and in close proximity. So again, learning who your customer is and what they're really interested in is a big part of this. Things like co-tenancy come into play. With some of that software I was talking about earlier, we can look at our clients' most successful locations. And, you know, in the instance of one large liquor store that I can think of that we work with, they're near King Soopers, Whole Foods. I think 50% of their traffic from Whole Foods cross-shops their store, 40% of King Soopers. And so it's really important for them to be located near those guys. So you can kind of understand some of that stuff. Nothing sells retail like successful other retail. So I think you're picking up some momentum now that you have other national brands that have come here. Walt alluded to that. But when you get good success stories, and you probably can't share sales volumes. I'm not sure the state shares all of that with you, but when good people in my business get that stuff, if they're not under confidentiality with one of their clients, if someone else gave it to them, that stuff's important. You know, keeping track of that, being able to share that success that these retailers are having in your community with others. I think some of the things you can do is if you're communicating with these retailers or these restaurateurs, and it is a chain, you know, if they're sharing with you that it's in their top 20% of stores, you can share that. Or it's, you know, it's better than average in the state of Colorado, or it's 20% above pro forma. All of those things you can share probably without violating some kind of confidentiality. The real estate matters, the location, the size, visibility, access, infrastructure is huge. You know, Walt was talking about Weibel's, I guess it wasn't Weibel's Industrial Park, but the other one, Walt, that was 58 acres that Jackson didn't have infrastructure. Growth follows infrastructure. You need to have the infrastructure in place if that's going to occur. These particularly industrial users won't wait for it. They've got the least amount of patience in my experience, and we've done quite a bit of industrial leasing over the years as well. When they're ramping up to build a warehouse, it's because they have a need, and they probably had the need yesterday. And so they don't want to wait 18 to 24 months to get all that stuff in and built. The problem Walt mentioned about a lack of inventory is not unique to Berthoud. Rich and I were talking about that as Walt was having his comments. We see that everywhere. That's a problem for Greeley. It's a problem for Fort Collins. In many ways, it's a sign of a healthy community that we don't have a bunch of empty buildings. We don't have a bunch of developers speccing stuff that's sitting empty. And so there's a flip side of that coin. But the negative side is there's not standing inventory when you do have a user that wants to come in. It has to be developed. When we're talking about Johnstown or other examples of successful development with these anchor retailers, all the examples I can think of have always been very collaborative, and there's been really good alignment between the towns or cities in some cases, the developers, the end users, and the brokers. And it may not mean that it's not, or I guess it doesn't mean that it's not hard. When Shields bought our property, we had 9 different contract amendments. So there's stuff you have to work through. It's hard at times. There's a lot of different things. They opted out of the Metro District at 2534 and formed their own. So there's challenges, but everybody has to be, aligned in terms of the end goal and what you're trying to achieve there. And I think not to be understated is the political environment and the regulatory environment. There are communities in northern Colorado where developers in the communities have been suing one another. There's been councils that have backed off what previous councils have agreed to. And a lot of that's played out in the paper. You probably all know what I'm talking about in terms of some of these examples. But that has a chilling effect on development that lasts years, maybe a decade in some cases, because the development community doesn't want to touch that. We've got a finite amount of time and resources, and we're going to go to where there's a good opportunity for us to do business. And if there's excessive risk and regulation and political risk, that's not palatable. Growth tends to be kind of like water. It follows the path of least resistance. And that's where it'll go in many cases. And so having an approval process that's transparent and predictable is really important. Having a fee structure that's aligned with your peers, or preferably from the end user's perspective, a little bit better. And then having the ability to offer select incentives. I've seen some communities offer that on fast food uses in northern Colorado, and I've shaken my head and said that's not a good use of taxpayer dollars. And then I've seen some other communities that were really selective with it, and they really brought the horsepower when it was necessary on a major anchor to catalyze things. And I think that's important. I also think you have to be selective as a community. There have been examples out at 2534 on property we owned where it's a large sporting goods retailer that was building basically a humongous log cabin, or proposing to do so. And we had an opportunity to get involved in that, and we passed. And it was an expensive deal, and I couldn't justify, I couldn't get it out in my mind how I would explain to my investors or everybody else that owned property around us what we were going to do with that giant log cabin if they didn't open for business or they walked away. And some people thought I was nuts. This was, basically on the heels of the Great Recession. And fortunately, we were able to land Shields not long after that, and we didn't look so nuts. But the land could still be sitting there today. I mean, you have to have discipline. You have to, make the best decisions you think you can for the community. And sometimes that's saying no to deals. Sometimes the best deals you'll ever do are the ones you don't say yes to. But you guys have to have the judgment to know, when there's something that is truly catalytic and what it will do for the balance of your community and other properties around there. When you add an anchor retailer to a community, you're dropping a rock in that pond, and you want to make sure that that ripple effect is positive. And so, but at the same time, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that, politics and local regulation matters a lot. And I really appreciate the time that you're all devoting to this. It's a really important task as a resident of Berthoud. I think we've got a terrific town administrator in Mr. Kirk. Walt does a really good job at his job, and you're well represented at your staff. I don't know Ann, but I understand she's got a great reputation from her work in Evans. And I think you're doing a lot of things right. One of the things that, you asked a question about growth earlier, Trustee Wing, and if you're doing a good job of it or not. And that's a really tough question to answer. I think Walt struggled with that one a little bit because each of you may have a different answer to that. Each of us may have a different answer to it. It's totally subjective. But if your objective is to stop retail sales tax leakage, or at least reduce it, I think the work you've done over the last 10 years with encouraging residential development is positive in that way. And I think you've also done a good job of balancing that with quality residential development. As a resident of Berthoud, I'm not driving by going, ooh, I bet they wish they had that one back. I don't say that often here as I drive around, but you see that in some other communities. So I think you're doing a good job of balancing the pressures of growth with some of those opportunities. And it's a tough question to answer, but that's my take on it. That's really all I had. Happy to respond to any questions you have.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up kind of infrastructure and its impact on retail. How critical is that in enticing new business in areas? And is that something the town should be looking at as possible incentive over the typical kind of regulation that we'd be looking at?
It's a really good question. With retail, you'll need to meet some minimum standards, starting with access. Obviously, there has to be adequate water and sewer capacity and power and those things, but retail isn't a huge draw on a lot of that, not nearly as much as residential in some cases. So really, it comes down to transportation infrastructure. And, lots of times you're talking about ingress and egress. And so I think that's really important when it comes to retail. I don't think that it's tough to respond to your question in a macro sense. It's better to kind of look at a specific project and say, are there unique infrastructure needs of this project that would help catalyze it and move it forward? But in general, I think your transportation improvements are going to be your big ones for retail. And then, visibility, good planning. The question came up about planning standards and drive-throughs along Mountain Avenue. And I think it's a fair point that we have special restrictions on drive-throughs. Nobody wants that necessarily in downtown. I shouldn't say nobody. A lot of us probably don't necessarily want that right in the heart of downtown, right? That's not the quaint, walkable downtown that so many people desire. But there are probably other areas within Mountain Avenue, out further west and out east that are totally appropriate for drive-throughs. And if you get a national restaurant in there, we were representing a landowner that owned a site on South College Avenue in Fort Collins that we were under contract with In-N-Out. The city of Fort Collins had some very specific standards that address stacking and conflicts between pedestrian walkways and drive-throughs. And it's pretty much impossible to have pedestrian connectivity on 4 sides of the site if you have a drive-through that wraps around the building on 3. And In-N-Out was unwilling to compromise their standards for that community. I mentioned earlier that growth is kind of like water, it follows the path of least resistance. In-N-Out didn't need to be in Fort Collins, and maybe Fort Collins was fine with that, just like my log cabin example earlier. But there's probably a time and a place for that stuff. You just have to find the right place in your community for it.
You said something that caught my ear with Shields about opting out of the Metro District and creating their own. So how did that work? But then also, how do Metro Districts affect the incentive side of things?
Yeah, it's a terrific question, Trustee Hardy. So there was a incentive package that was offered to Shields when Shields came in, and it was necessary for, and we owned about 70 acres of land there. We sold roughly 40 to Shields and a company called Carson Development that came attached to the hip with Shields. And it became necessary for them to capture as many revenue streams as possible to be able to offer those incentives to Shields. And so the master developers of 2534, the people that owned the balance of the 542 acres, deemed that they would have enough revenue based upon the ripple effect from Shields to agree to a buyout or to subordinate a portion of their bonds to allow Shields to come in and capture kind of a first position on some of that. And so there was a layered incentive that included, Metro District revenue and discounts on land and PIF. If you go buy something on your receipt out there, I think it's damn near 4% of additional sales tax that was added. We could do the math based upon some of the numbers Trustee Wing was throwing out there on like a Costco, for instance, earlier, and that adds up pretty fast. And you can bond that revenue and you can use it for an upfront payment to certain retailers. You can use it to buy down the land cost and give it to the developer. So the developer's incentivized to offer a free or reduced site or maybe put in site improvements. So, the big tools tend to be, sales tax reimbursements, sharing a portion of that 4% that you already have. A public improvement fee, which would be on top of that, and you can decide how you split that. The town may use it to recapture some of its lost revenue elsewhere on the project, or it may all go to the developer or the end user. There's Metro District revenue where some of these anchors, you might opt out of it. In other cases, they may wish to have no PIF because they don't like the optics of their customers having to pay an extra 4% if they go there, but they might allow you to put a 60 mil on your Metro District. And so they'll pay it in terms of a higher property tax long-term. And then the other one that, if you're not discussing it, I think it's worthy of a conversation as a community, would be like an urban renewal authority in a downtown area. And sometimes those have been used out along the interstates. I think that there's a time and a place for that. I tend to be pretty moderate amongst the development community, where I think there have been a lot of URA abuses over time. And I think there needs to be reasonable guardrails on that stuff. Where I think it has been appropriate in kind of quote-unquote greenfield development is if that greenfield development has key regional transportation issues that need to be addressed, or maybe it's littered with old non-producing oil and gas wells that are truly blights that need to be plugged and abandoned in the flow lines, need to be mitigated. So some of those things might be reasonable tools for a URA, but it was designed for urban renewal. And a downtown like you have here in Berthoud, that's an awesome gem in the community. That might be a way to capture some incremental property tax and reinvest back in the community and some public improvements there.
I was gonna bring up too. I think we all have kind of specific rather than generalized anchor tenants that we're kind of interested in the future. But on the flip side of that, there's a strong interest in protecting our small business and mom and pop joints. And obviously, existing space is probably one of our biggest challenges from what I've heard. Are you aware of any joint public-private kind of build projects in the Northern Front Range that have kind of been used to relieve that,
Yeah,
issue?
it's a great question, Trustee Murphy.
And this would be very much on
I,
kind
I,
of a
I-
micro
I-
scale.
I've seen some good ones and I've seen some bad ones.
Mhm.
And a couple of examples I can think of, there have been communities that have purchased property and they've wanted to basically dictate how it develops, with a more hands-on way than allowing the market and the development community to do that. And in my experience, that's yielded very few positive results. It's hard. The development process takes a long time. Your boards turn over, and it's tough to get everybody to agree, right? And so those have tended to be kind of failures in my experience, and I think it's been an abuse of public funds where communities have purchased those lands and then they've just basically sat fallow because nobody can really get behind a single plan. Some of the best public-private partnerships that I've seen, one in particular in downtown Loveland is the Rialto Theater. And, you had the Northern Colorado Community Foundation invest in that. You had the city invest in it. There was a private developer that built some event space associated with that. And so you basically took a community asset there in that theater and you enhanced it, you made it better, and you kind of created a magnet downtown there. And so that's a good example of it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Great presentation, by the way. Maybe this is a question for anybody in the room, but I guess one thing that's been on my mind as we've been going through all the kind of data and, hearing about how retail is really important to, I guess, help pay for the long-term impacts of residential, right? But also understanding that Berthoud is not quite at the threshold, maybe that just automatically puts us into the running for a lot of retail development. And so I don't want to be like, the sky is falling, but the one thing that's on my mind is like, is it a moving target? So Walt, just going to throw the number out there. You said 20,000, right? And I'm going to round up and say we're at 15,000, right, in the GMA, but like, as we grow to 20, is the threshold all of a sudden going to be 25, So do these customers of the town, quote, do these keep on increasing, and are we always going to be kind of playing catch up? And if that is a true risk, how do we mitigate it just to kind of be like, yeah, we're always going to be a little bit smaller, but here's what we're going to do to get you to develop here?
Yeah, that's such an insightful question. Thank you for that. The answer to the question really is that it depends upon the retailer you're trying to attract. I did a study shortly after the pandemic for a presentation I was given about some of the more successful shopping malls in the Western United States. And you basically had to have, at that time, about 20,000 households with incomes over 200,000 within 5 miles if you're going to be one of the top shopping malls in the country, Western U.S. anyway. I don't think that's a realistic expectation for Berthoud.
Right.
We've got 20,000 households in all of northern Colorado with incomes above 200,000. So we've got enough high income households to support one regional mall, not necessarily like 3. And so I think it's really important who you're targeting. You're much closer to where you need to be to attract a grocer. I think that's going to happen in the next 5 years. But Councilmember Murphy brought up a good point too, that you all are going to have to balance when it comes to incentives and everything, that what's the impact that's gonna have on your community grocer in Hayes Market? What's gonna happen to those businesses that are in that shopping center? And you kind of get into the situation of answering the question of, are you picking winners and losers? And so I think you guys are gonna have to figure out what you think is best in that particular case. Generally, the free market's gonna pick winners and losers. And so I think you back the strongest horse, would be my default. But that's a very blanket statement, and you'd want to look at the very specifics of that case before someone said something like that. But to answer your question, I mean, you've got less than 2% of the traffic at the Target in Longmont and Loveland coming from Berthoud, but you're probably not getting a Target unless you got 50,000 people.
Yeah.
And so there's just some reality of that.
But you're saying that some of them could be static, like if we're, like say a retailer's threshold is 20,000, right? And they're looking at Berthoud and they're like, maybe 5 years from now, and then 5 years from now, we are, say at 20,000, that might be a little bit too fast, but are they gonna say, now we need 30,000?
Generally speaking, their population criteria remains relatively static. Because incomes increase. And so if someone's got a target that they'll look at trade areas of 20,000 people, that might have been static from 10 years ago because incomes have increased, along with their costs due to inflation over the last 10 years.
Okay, gotcha. So it's not necessarily a big risk.
Yeah, it kind of, again, depends upon the retailer. Like there's some, like certain auto parts stores that will look for markets that have what they're deeming to be more like people that are more likely to do it themselves. And there's income and other demographics that kind of factor into that. And then there are others that are really looking at, household income, and they're looking for high income households. They're looking for, an average home price above X, those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's like more of a score of many metrics, and so you could.
Yeah, it kind of is unique to each retailer about, in terms of what they're focused on and who their customer is.
Now, could we, in that question, could Berthoud punch above its weight? What I mean by that is, so they want 20,000, but we have 15, but we have these two bookends, I-25 and 287, that maybe make us look like a $35,000 community population because of this traffic we have going, and we get the benefit of Loveland, and we get the benefit of Longmont, and we get the benefit of everything going on I-25.
Resident equivalents because of our traffic.
Yeah, I mean, because McDonald's, I'm making this up, McDonald's might have said, we need 20,000, but they popped the store on 287, and lo and behold, it's performing like a town that's got 35,000 people in it. So is that you don't have to check maybe every single criteria?
For sure.
There's some anomalies?
Yeah, so Loveland, Timnath, Johnstown, all examples of that, where it's possible to punch above your weight class.
I'm sure Costco would not have built that store with, what's the name of the town?
The population in Timnath, when Costco agreed to that, was like 1,000
Is not
people.
conducive to a Costco, but with everything going on in the interstate, they're a regional draw.
Yeah. Now, they happen to be across the street from Fort Collins, which had
No, exactly,
80,000 people, but yeah, and that's the case we've been making out at I-25 and 34 for years, right? It's not necessarily about the population of Johnstown. The population of Johnstown and the surrounding area has really only grown within the last 5 years or so to justify any of that.
Again, Shields, not
previously
unlike
it was-
a Costco, is a regional draw.
Yeah, I mean, with Shields, they're looking at, the entire region, so 750,000 people. Where's the most convenient location to go for all of that? What's most proximate to Rocky Mountain National Park? You have 4.2 million visitors a year going to Rocky Mountain National Park, and 70% of them enter on US 34. So there's ways you figure out your customer, and then you kind of make the case, right?
I have a couple questions.
Please.
The first one, I'm just wondering if there's like a certain balance or percentage of commercial to real estate or home real estate that would make more sense for Berthoud, if you've thought about that. Because even our developments at our two cash registers of I-25 and 287 have a lot of heavy residential. planned in those as well. And so I am concerned that even at our cash register locations, that we're gonna be heavy on residential and not capitalizing on commercial. Is there a certain percentage or a certain formula that helps balance that so that we're capturing?
That's a terrific question, Trustee Albrecht, and it kind of gets to Trustee Kurt's question a little bit earlier about, are some of these things static or not? And what we've seen with the impact of more online sales is the per capita demand for bricks and mortar retail space has declined. And so I think that ratio, more so than ever, is tilting more and more towards residential. And, you can look back, if we really want to dive deep in Colorado to like the Gallagher Amendment, if some of you are familiar with that, you basically locked property tax, I think it was in the mid-'80s in Colorado, at 51% commercial and 49% residential. And those were more or less the ratios back then of the dollar value of property in the state. Well, since that time, what happened is residential grew, 5 times as fast in terms of the dollar value of property. And that was continuing to increase until it was frozen, I think, a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago in an election. And so residential always kind of dominates, and you need a lot of rooftops to support some of these retailers, unless, like a Turion example, where you've got all of that traffic on I-25, that might be a case where you can punch above your weight class. I don't know that 287 is really enough to do it, honestly. It's my opinion, but it's an educated one on the matter, and I think that, Longmont and Loveland are well retailed on 287, and I don't think you can really make the case that they're underserved there. You might be able to make the case, that there's, residents that are nearby that are not within the city limits that are out west that kind of get pulled into that. But there is no hard and fast rule. It
I'm
is.
curious post Gallagher, because I helped our fire department de-Gallagherize many years ago,
Yeah.
so they could capture more of the sales tax, and then, or the tax that was coming in to serve our special districts. But now that we're post Gallagher, is that having a similar impact, those ratios? Or, I mean, how is that getting balanced?
It's a great question.
If you don't have the answer to that, when you mentioned it, it made me curious if we're still.
I don't have a perfect grasp of municipal finance. Chris is going to be, a better person to try to answer that.
We can
I'm not
dig into
totally
that later. I just was
passing the buck,
curious.
but I guess what I am saying is that the ratio of residential to commercial is increasing, that it's requiring more rooftops, that there's more per capita demand for residential and less for commercial. I showed you guys this rendering earlier, and it kind of relates to your question. Can you see the cursor, if I'm moving that on there, guys?
No.
No. So there's a 34s in the foreground, there's retail just right behind that, and then you'll see another road that's Ronald Reagan Boulevard today, right behind that. What you see behind there are a bunch of office buildings. That's about the only thing that's materially different in this rendering. In terms of the built environment, scale and everything, it's pretty close. But when you go out there today, there's 1,200 apartments back there instead of all of those office buildings. And that's because the market shifted. We didn't have the demand for corporate office in northern Colorado, and that's gotten even worse after the pandemic. And so we had to adapt on the fly. One of the ways that Johnstown could seed its investment here in that retail and make sure that it was sustainable and a good investment for the town long-term was to put as many walking wallets nearby those retailers as possible within, tasteful development standards. And so they increased density there.
I feel like that's one of our issues, is getting people walking past and spending money. We're not having that take place in Berthoud. So I just want you to, can you expand on what you just said there? Because I want to know how we can capitalize on that in our town. Because we're gonna have development at certain segments, but they're not necessarily gonna be connected for a long time. and we need our downtown to have that walkability where people are spending.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think right now, where you're most likely to see it are in master plan communities that are more greenfield. And so, you know, driving by Heron Lakes and Gateway up there, you'll see people that live in the townhomes and the single-family homes and the patio homes there walking to and from some of those retail and restaurant establishments. You know, when you have master plan communities, and I think there's a big one that's proposed out the west side of town here, that the master plan looks awesome. There are some very efficient cottages and townhomes and higher density single-family attached products layered in there. And I think you'll get a lot of walkability and connectivity to, you know, retail and restaurants nearby there when the weather's good. As far as downtown, that's going to be tricky because you've got a very special and unique downtown. And I don't know that this community is ready en masse for people to be buying up blocks and bulldozing homes and going vertical with apartments.
Is that part of the answer to that, though? Building something that people want to go to? If you build the best X, then your folks are going to go there. But if you've got mediocre or less than average, you're not going to get the wallets in our community. That's what we keep talking about. They're going other places.
It's true, and you can look at downtown, and again, I've lived here for 2 years, so I don't pretend to be an expert in downtown Berthoud. You've got people that are. You all are much more expert in that than I. But there are probably some pockets or some older buildings, and if there was a URA that existed, could these be purchased? Could they be raised? Could they be sent out to RFP for somebody to build higher density? Where is that appropriate? Should it be mixed use? Maybe it's over by the railroad tracks, or, you know, a little bit further east of downtown, or in some of that area that used to be a little bit more industrial that now could maybe become a little bit more residential or mixed use and walkable to downtown. And so that's where I think maybe there's some opportunity there to introduce some density and you know, get more walking wallets, so to speak, downtown.
We've tried that with the town hall. Are we gonna talk about that?
We can, yeah.
Well,
If I may
that would be
suggest,
another night, but
yeah, I mean, this is obviously a big topic, and there's been some
we tried, we
fantastic
did the old
questions.
town hall, but something fell through with that, but we're trying to rehabilitate kind of blighted areas.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it would be great to get into some of that if we can. I'd also love for Rich Warner from Upstate to be able to talk to you guys about
Yeah,
primary,
we're gonna hit the
primary
9:30,
employment
might be
before we get
two-night
too late.
mini-series here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was
That's
awesome
great,
to have
Ryan.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Local
My
job.
pleasure. Thank you.
And welcome to town.
Thank you.
Good, do we need a break?
No, let's go for it.
All right.
Sorry, Rich.
Welcome.
No worries. I learn something every time I hear you, Ryan, so
Likewise.
I appreciate it. So we're gonna try and keep you awake here. I can get this going. Walt, there we go. All right. Let's see here. Okay. So again, my name is Rich Warner with Upstate Colorado. Hopefully we're gonna go through these slides rather quickly, first of all. And one of the things that we'll do is really just have an overarching conversation on a lot of the points that you've heard tonight. At Upstate, our focus is on primary jobs, which you've heard about, but we tend to work under these main points of marketing, connecting, facilitating, and advocating. All of this is under the guise of creating a landing pad for companies that are looking to locate in the area. All of the things that we do on a daily basis really come into play as it relates to the technical siting of projects, and then the underlying issues that companies are looking at. So for your community, as you're looking at this, our basic services run from everything that you've seen tonight as it relates to demographic data, the site selection process, which we'll get into, local community support. And so I'm going to sort of jump ahead here because I want you to look at this map for a second. And when we talk about where we operate, we talk about Weld County, but we also work here in Larimer County. We run a revolving loan fund as an example that covers all of Larimer County, with the exception of Fort Collins and Loveland. And so we have in our arsenal, in our toolbox, things that can help you as a community work to land companies here. Now, I bring this map up because every community is different, right? Every community is at a different level of sophistication, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it in a population size. I mean it in a infrastructure status. I mean it in a administrative structure. I don't know if you guys were looking at one of Walt's slides, but he snuck in there on one of them a couple of quotes on his slide, and one of them talked about how great Walt is. I saw it. It's like, Walt was so responsive and so amazing. But, you know, I've known Walt for 20 years, and he is one of the best economic developers in this region, and has been. And I say that because you should be fortunate, because a lot of communities don't even have an economic developer. They don't have, I'm listening to Chris, and I've gotten to know Chris since he's been here. You don't have, communities don't have administrators necessarily who understand the breadth of what it takes to develop a community. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that you guys are at a different level than other communities. There are other communities that have greater populations than you. When we talk about retail, they're citing 3 grocery stores in their community as you're looking to get 1 King Soopers, right? These kind of things happen. But being flexible to create, we were talking about Shields as an example, having those tools and that flexibility to work on a project in a way that meets the demands of what the company is looking for, but, you know, Trustee Wing, you know, we talked about punching above your weight, right? There are ways to do that as a community, and having that kind of flexibility in what you're working on is gonna be important. So let's see if we can get this. So when we talk about the sort of standard process of economic development, we talk about job creation, private investment, tax base expansion, wealth creation, and then higher quality of life and a higher standard of living. That's why we concentrate on primary jobs at Upstate. Retail is great, it creates that awesome sales tax base. But when you're talking about a primary job, those companies are creating payroll in your community, and it's not leaving unless we get into the leakage discussion, of course. But what you want to do is you want to keep that wealth within the community as much as possible. So I won't go through the definition again, but what I want to talk about, and this is, I think, appropriate, is growth versus development. Because we've kind of been using those 2 words interchangeably. But growth is going to happen whether you plan for it or not, right? We know, and we have studied and talked to the state demographer on a regular basis, Northern Colorado is growing faster than most areas of the country, right? So in the 2010 to 2020 census, Weld County MSA, which is from the edge of your community here all the way up to the Wyoming border, 4th fastest growing MSA in the entire country. Your population, the population of Northern Colorado, is expected to double in the next 20 years. This is what every demography report is telling us. And we've gone back and checked, and every year we've kind of met those milestones. So it's something really important to pay attention to. Now, when we talk about how economic development works, we talk about kind of traditional things. We need more jobs, right? We need more businesses, we need more people. But, you know, for every job that's created, that person needs a place to sleep at night. So where are they sleeping? Where are they spending their money? That's what this is all about. And when you are growing and looking and talking about these plans, be specific in the sense of creating the mechanisms to attract these things, whether it be new residential, whether it be new retail, whether it means cultivating entrepreneurs in your community or primary jobs, right? And there's ways to do that that can be very deliberate. I've worked in communities across the Front Range, and first let me tell you, I've been a local economic developer. It's hard work because you've got to wear so many different hats. And you were talking about our business is happy. I think Trustee Wing, you may have asked that question as well. If they're not happy, trust me, you're going to hear about it. You're going to hear about it as a trustee. The economic developer is going to hear about it. The town administrator is going to hear about it. You will know if a business is not happy. So as we look at this and we talk about how you are trying to grow as a community, it's not necessarily about the population number you have. It's not necessarily about one site versus another. It's about creating that landing pad. It's about creating an environment where, and it was mentioned before, and I think it was probably one of the most important things, is that creating that certainty for a company as they come in. So when a company is coming and looking at your community specifically, we refer to that as the site selection process. And very, very simple, it is not site selection, it's site elimination. A company is looking for the path of least resistance. We heard it, I've heard it several times tonight. And as they're looking at that, there's also a business case. I once got we'll say a polite disagreement with a town manager in a different community because he was talking about how great his community was, and hopefully every town administrator and every town council thinks they have the greatest community, but he was adamant that a company was going to come because he was friends with them, right? He had a meaningful relationship with the company, and he kind of forgot about the cost of doing business, right? Because the cost of doing business matters. Labor rates matter, the number of skilled workers you have, the number of available workforce. Yes, the quality of life matters. Political certainty has really risen up the list in the past few years, but being able to having the right site or the right building, meeting the timelines, that's another big thing we see is and we heard it, if a company is going to have to wait 24 months to be in business, that's 24 months of lost profit for them versus maybe it's the community next door or it's the community up the street, right? These are things that every single project is absolutely putting in a spreadsheet and measuring your community against the next one. Make no mistake about it. All of these things, all of this funnel, it all matters, but at the end of the day, having available sites matters, having political certainty, and when I say political certainty, I really mean not only how your town acts, but having code that represents what you want to do, having a planning process that reflects supporting particular industries, and making sure, and I think this question came up, and I think this is something really, really important to remember, making sure that the rules that you are setting up and the tools that you are setting up to attract that big, shiny company to come in, they apply to the companies that are already here. Retention is critical in this. So making sure that if a company is here and they want to expand, they have those same opportunities. I know this for a fact, one of our favorite companies, Ursa Major, which is here. I can remember 10 years ago talking to them when they were looking for a couple $1 million to get this project off the ground. I think their success is well documented, but having that kind of support system to help companies continually grow, it's so much easier to help a company grow that's already here than to bring a new one in. So let me go on here. One of the things that we see a lot, and I'll just kind of go through this pretty quick, is what matters to a business and how they adjudicate their process and their site selection may be different than how your citizens think. And so we talk about this a lot. They're looking at all of these different things like sites and buildings and workforce and financial capital, transportation, utilities, infrastructure. And yes, they want to know where their executives can live and where their labor force is coming from, how long of the drive time, and what's the labor shed. We do a lot of those radius type searches. That's what matters to business. What matters to the worker who is going to work there is the community they live in, right? So having low crime rates and having a hospital near here, how much does the housing cost in your community? How are the schools? If there's anyone with a child here in this room, I would argue they're looking where they're going to live proportionate to what school the kids they think they should go to, right? How far, colleges, universities, cultural opportunities. We started to get into a downtown discussion here, and I think it's a great one to have. We could probably go on for another couple hours on just that one. I would say, again, tools in the toolbox, when you were talking, Ryan, DDA is another option, another financing option, which you can extend terms on bonding even longer than URAs. So all of these kind of things is you're sort of planning the next strategic plan in the next 10 years to think about. But I think to kind of start to put a bow on all of this, commercial matters, residential matters, industrial matters, retail matters. And when I say industrial, I'm putting that all under the sort of primary job classification. But these are the things that you have to be holistic about, because if you're not, then you're just, unfortunately, another bedroom community. And I don't mean to be negative about that, but there's all sorts of challenges that you're trying to identify here on how you're going to grow. And so one of the things that I like to sort of do this is, what is the single most important role that you guys play here? Is it providing incentives? Is it a positive business climate, strategic leadership and facilitation, or quality services and amenities? So I'm throwing that out as a question to anyone who wants to try and answer it.
All the above.
Well, come on now. Which is the most important, the single one?
B. That's a toughie.
Mhm.
The business climate is such a big universe. A lot can fall under that. And I would say one of our jobs is to knock down roadblocks for businesses to prosper and be profitable.
First of all, Trustee Ewing, I love that response. Is that what we're gonna go with? We're gonna agree with that, or do we want to disagree? Anyone else?
I think that was a good explanation. You can't do all the above?
Oh, no, you can. I just wanted, this is from a poll of what business thinks is the single most important. And I'm gonna flip it in a second.
A, then. Is a business saying this?
Uh-huh. So A.
I think C.
B.
I love
I'll be a
that you guys-
contrarian. I'm just gonna say
This is-
B now.
Well, are you paying
Nice.
attention here? Because this is every one of you has picked something different, right? And I think that's great. Because first of all, let me be clear, it all does matter, right? So here's what business said, okay? They said provide quality service and amenities, 35%, provide strategic leadership, 31%, create a positive business, 24%, and incentives, 4%.
Incentives don't make a bad deal good.
They don't make a bad deal good, right?
It's really eye-opening.
But what I always say.
Sometimes you need them, but they don't make a bad deal good.
Yeah, and I think, and we could spend an entire work session just on incentives. As it relates to incentives, having the tools in the toolbox is what a company wants to see. Having, we always talk about it in our role as we're going to turn over every rock for a company. We're going to do that sort of matchmaking process to say, okay, what are you doing? How are you doing it? What do you qualify for? Is it, is your company going into an enterprise zone? Are they going, do they, it's really funny. 10 years ago, I used to tell companies all the time, there is no such thing as grants. Never, ever, ever. Now, with COVID and everything, there's been a whole bunch of them. And now we actually have a grants navigator position in our company at Upstate, who's helping communities research grants under the IIJA. So, but what's really critical about that is making sure that you're open to working with a company, whether it be facilitating assistance through a URA, a metro district, just the simple, and I just can't say it enough, and I will say it until, someday, a long time from now when I retire, infrastructure. Every single project that we see come across our desk, particularly this year, is asking for more water, more electricity, right? Transportation routes they're measuring. All of these things are so critical in the process. And having those, or at least having the plan, having the cost of a water line extension as an example. It might not even be in the ground yet, but if you can at least tell the company that in 7 months, we can have that water line extended to you here. That's an incentive in itself. And it's by far, again, if you're helping a company be in business 3 months sooner than they thought they would be, that's 3 months worth of profit to them. That's an incentive in itself. So, and again, so here I talk about that, and I talk about the regulatory environment, having consistent policy. And I know you can't find future councils and things of that nature, but having a consistent platform so that a company can look at your community and say, I know for a fact for the next 10 years, I'm going to be good under these parameters. That kind of stability is what companies really are craving, particularly as we see communities who are not doing well in that front. That puts you at a competitive advantage. So I think that's about as quick as I could go through that. And I know we're running late. Happy to answer any other questions. I know we've been going for a while, so.
What are you? What is upstate Colorado?
That's great.
Where does the funding come from? Are you supported by the government? I don't know, and you may have said this up front, but what kind of entity are you?
Well, thank you, Trustee Wing, for really, you've really captured the heart of an economic developer, because what we do is we don't talk about ourselves, right? Our job is to talk about the companies and the great communities where we represent, but we're a nonprofit agency. We've been around for 35 years, actually. We actually act as a public-private entity. Our board of directors is made up of both the private sector and the public sector. And our funding is derived from our largest funder is Weld County, because Weld County does not have an economic development agency. So we do a lot of work with them. But we actually then are fortunate that we receive support from a lot of our communities, like 25 different communities in Weld County. Berthoud is actually one of our supporters as well, so thank you for that. And then we also receive funds from the private sector. Because of the model that we've created, we can then be agnostic through this process. So again, our job is to support your priorities and your growth as you define it. We do work under this primary job structure, but it doesn't mean that we haven't done Main Street work before and make connections. But going back to that sort of first slide, our job is to connect. Our job is to basically, as I always say, we're out marketing nationally and developing locally, right? So, so I spend my time running around the country and really talking about all of the assets and benefits that we have here in Weld County in northern Colorado. We then, and the most important part of what we do is when a company contacts us, we're working through the real estate search process. We are taking their requirements and doing matchmaking, right? And trying to suck them into that funnel. So when a company knocks on our door and they say, we need a building that's 50,000 square feet and we need 50 megawatts of power and 1 million gallons of water a day, we say, we can't help you, right? But when it does work, we are making that match with the community.
So kind of a broker model, if you
A
will.
little bit, yeah, but we don't take any fees at all from the companies. We don't get any commissions whatsoever, because we're a nonprofit. Our job is to promote your community. Our job is to promote the counties. Our job is to promote northern Colorado.
Yeah, but you have payrolls, you have to have funding somewhere. You
Yeah.
gotta- I mean, even though you're nonprofit, you
Of
still
course.
have expenses and
Of course,
everything that goes with
absolutely.
that, running a business.
Yeah, sometimes I always say it's not easy being a nonprofit, right? But we act like a business, but we're funded like a nonprofit. So think of it in a most simplistic sort of view, like a chamber of commerce in that sense of we've got different funding levels and models. But that allows us, those funds allow us to go out and do our job. I will politely say I think we've got the greatest job in the world because we're able to work with a company to take what they're giving us an RFI on paper and say, we need this, and bring that to a community. And ultimately, again, and I want to be really, really clear about this because it's really important. We don't close these deals. The communities close these deals. It is your administration, it's your economic developer, it's your planning department, it's your public works people, and then it's you who ultimately approve a permit, an incentive, right? That's what closes the deal. So,
Thank you.
does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking, because if you didn't understand what we do, then that would have been a little bit of a problem.
I just never, yeah, I just didn't know how you guys are funded, so that was enlightening. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Did you have another one? This is probably a redundant question, but I hammer this home with, we're not getting a rail station. And so in like a future economy, if we're talking about walkable downtowns, it would seem, just to a peasant like me, it would seem to have a market like effect. Would you see that, or is that not really on? So like a primary employer looking at stuff for commuters coming in or their employees, would that be on their minds or maybe not so much?
It would. Thank you for the question, Mayor. So again, this could be a whole nother work session just on that. But what you typically see around transit stations is transit-oriented development. And so there is a lot of housing and retail and mixed-use type activities that happen around stations. So it's something to think about. Now, when we're talking about, to answer your question specifically, a labor shed and a workforce, having people who are commuting via train then can open up that labor shed to a wider audience for a company. But my understanding of the current situation is that the state of Colorado and the governor's office put a designation on that, on the current definition of Front Range Rail, which is intercity, not commuter. Okay, so what that does is it allows for almost and don't quote me on this, but almost an ability for an eminent domain type activity over the tracks that allows for that project to use current rail that's in line. But it would have to be there's a certain distance classification. So I think that would have to change in order for Berthoud to get a stop on that. But I'll be honest with you, all of this is probably a few years away.
Yeah, 2030. Yeah, that's exactly how I know it is too. So I just wanted to, good to hear from you.
Yeah, but I can tell you that anyone who, if there is a train station, there would be a lot of developers interested in that particular area, without question.
An observation. Your terminology was wallets walking?
Yeah, walking
That's pretty
wallets.
cool.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things. I drove through town this weekend, and the Tricker Street thing was Tricker Street was going on. And then you think about the 4th of July event we do, right? And you just think about the masses of people that were able to draw. And my point in that is, if you create something where people want to engage with that, it seems like we have the head count to support things. And those were just two examples. Both sides of the street were packed from the whole part of town. And then we have these other events that are drawing, some pretty substantial numbers.
A lot of communities.
And my point behind the whole thing is, build it and they will come. but you gotta build the right thing for them to come.
Brett's trying to push like a Woodstock, but calling it Cornstalk? Yeah, okay.
That, you might not want that downtown.
No, it would be out of town.
Wingstop.
Wingstop. Don't confuse those two. Thank you for the point and the question. A lot of communities have very focused efforts as it relates to programming to create that walkability. You will see communities that will build areas for farmers markets, as an example, like built-in stands. You will see concerts in the park like every week that drive traffic. Just this past week, I was talking to my 11-year-old son, and I asked him, we were talking about this exact issue in Main Street in Windsor, and I said, well, when do you buy ice cream on Main Street? And he goes, well, after the concert. I go, when else do we ever go to that ice cream store? He goes, never. And I'm just using that to illustrate the point is that a lot of times communities can build out infrastructure and gathering places and then have either the DDAs or the chambers work diligently to create those events that create that foot traffic.
Coincidentally, we just talked about that exact thing on Main Street and possibly having bands and music and activities going on. So I think we're thinking
Great.
along those lines.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, when we think about downtowns, maybe this is just the world according to Chris, but I think I'm right about this.
I love that show.
You know, I think downtowns are at a competitive disadvantage with traditional suburban retail, right? There's less parking, maybe the access isn't as good. You know, the space is smaller, it's filled with mom and pops, you're not getting national retail brands. And those mom and pop or smaller kind of retail stores, maybe you're lucky to get a little regional retailer or restaurant. They have a much harder time competing on price, right? Obviously with the national chains and big box that have a harder time competing in speed and other things. And so you're really looking for when you go downtown is experience, right? It's experiential. And so if, you know, if downtown Disney looked like a strip mall in LA, nobody would go there, right? But you're going there for an experience, right? I use that as a really maybe over-the-top example, but I think that's honestly one of the reasons why I named some of the maybe more successful downtowns and certainly the downtown redevelopments. Everybody cites Fort Collins as this beautiful downtown, right? And people will actually go, I mean, as a resident of Northern Colorado, maybe we've all done this, right? You just go to downtown Fort Collins to kind of hit the ice cream shop, wander around, especially, you know, the holidays, lots of lights. It's an experience.
Sure.
I don't drive to Fort Collins to go shop, right? I just don't. I don't drive downtown.
Pearl Street Mall.
But you go for an experience. Pearl Street Mall is a good example. So when we think about downtown in you know, in a very different way than maybe we think about other more kind of traditional suburban retail, it's got to be a lot about the experience. And that's a hard thing to create, especially something that's unique and that works. Events are part of that, you know, artwork and lighting and big sidewalks and, you know, whatever. I mean, there's a million ways
We
to
have
do
houses,
that.
literally houses on our Main Street, right?
Yeah. And the reality is residential is really important to downtown success too, right? You need people that can walk and bike to downtown or that live in downtown and that become kind of a captive customer base. I think for downtowns to be really successful, but
My opinion, we have a long ways to go from capitalizing on what we have down there and the population surrounding it that could be frequenting it. I really don't think that we're anywhere close to taking full advantage of what we have currently. And I don't think more development is gonna help us if we don't have a better vision for the downtown and how to fully utilize it as it is today. Because the customer base is there. We have a huge population and they're not using our downtown and they're amazing business owners down there. I absolutely love all of them and they're struggling. So I love this conversation because I think it helps us identify two things. One are where we capitalize funds from bigger retail at our cash register areas, but how we also juxtapose that with highlighting what we have that others don't, which is our historic downtown. It's quaint and small and sweet, but we need dollars down there.
I went in Grandpa's a weekend ago, there was no seats left.
That's
It was great. Every single chair was full, and that little, I don't know, Artisan Bread or something, whatever that little company is.
Right.
Thing is cranking all the time. There's people lined up out the door. So again, I think the businesses that are providing a good business seem to be, I don't know how good they're doing, but they.
Depends on the day, right, and the time of the day. Yeah.
Probably, yeah, that's part of it, definitely.
Yep, that's good feedback.
Any other questions for our presenters?
Great job.
This was awesome.
It is
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you all very much for indulging in an evening of economic development from hopefully 3-4 experts, but I really want to thank Rich, Ryan, and Audrey for spending time with us. Thank you all
Thank
very
you.
much. And hopefully it gave us all some food for thought.
Definitely.
We got some projects on our table. We just talked about downtown.
Yeah.
To Chris's credit, it was really Chris's idea to consider forming a DDA. And now it's up to the businesses and property owners along Main Street to determine whether they want to go forward with it or not, and that's where we are. And we'll see what they decide to do, because we can't make that decision for them. But everything you talked about with the downtown and bringing more activities downtown, is all part of a DDA. So we think it could be instrumental in really enhancing the long-term effect of our quaint and very nice downtown.
In my previous job before I retired, I would build $25 and $30 million stores. And we never would build a store unless we had marketing surveys. And we typically would have a minimum of 2, one outside, maybe one internal, maybe 3. You've brought some stuff high level here, some of these metrics and numbers. Do you have a formal marketing survey for the town? All the metrics that go with driving a business, you know, the street traffic, the demographics, the income. Do you have
Available,
a
yes, I have.
packet that you are able to hand
Yes,
out to?
But I usually tailor it to whomever I'm talking to.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I have all the data. But it just depends what business or retailer or whomever I'm talking to, that I tailor it to what they're asking.
Thank you.
Yep. And so thank you all very, very much. We very much appreciated this opportunity. Hopefully you learned something. And I'm sure there's still questions. Be more than happy to come back. I was gonna say, the other thing that's on your plate, I'm not telling you what to do, was, we're looking at the redevelopment of our public works site. It's almost in the heart of our downtown. And then we're still gonna be looking at our old town hall site. That's 2 sites that we have control over, that we have, potential opportunities to really enhance our downtown through those 2 sites. So just something to think about. Well, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much
Yeah,
appreciated.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Have a good night.
We have had some great agendas.